Hello, everyone. This is your host, Akil Jabbar, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. On today's episode, we'll be talking about how to perfect the onboarding process for improving the customer experience and reducing churn. Today, we have our special guest, Jeff Epstein, joining us. Jeff is an entrepreneur, team builder, hustler, and investor. He is the founder of Onboard.io, which is a SaaS made specifically for customer implementation to automate, optimize, and create the perfect journey for every customer and enabling companies to manage the perfect onboarding process. Jeff was previously the founder of Ambassador, where he ran it for about 9 years, which is a referral tracking, attribution, and management platform for businesses, and was acquired by West Corp in late 2018. He is a lifelong entrepreneur, a 2011 NYC TechStar graduate, and is described as one of those rare founders you only read about in books because his unmatchable drive to succeed. So thank you for joining us, Jeff. Glad you're here with us today.
Thanks, Akil. Yeah, great to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no worries. So prior to launching Onboard, before getting into that, I want to hear a little bit about your story about Ambassador. I know you built that yourself and you grew it over 9 years, and then it was acquired by West Corp in 2018. Can you share your experience of exiting that business and looking back now? Do you feel it was the right decision to sell at that time?
Yeah, it was a really long journey. I was a solo founder for sure. I definitely had a lot of help along the way. But back in 2010, when I started Ambassador, 2009 actually, there wasn't a lot of content out there about startups, and so I learned a lot of things and did a lot of things the wrong way. There were no, obviously, podcasts didn't even exist, I don't think, back then. So much more you can learn online, which is a lot better. So that journey was interesting. Learned a lot, and for I think for me and from a business perspective, the timing I think worked out really well. We were at an inflection point in the company where we really needed to make a big move, and it was there were some options on the table, whether it was take a big round of financing or find a strategic partner, and we went down and sort of parallel paths, has worked on both of those things at the same time. And we found that, partnering with Wes was a really great opportunity for both, the employees and the shareholders. And that's something you don't always find. And so lots of people have grown and learned a ton over the past couple of years, working at Wes, which is now Intrado, and obviously Ambassador is still, doing well. And thankfully, like, every single person had a great job and a great opportunity and a lot of incentives to perform well. So that was exciting for us. And I would do it again. It doesn't go the way you always think, and you learn, again, like everything else, you learn by seeing it happen and by doing it. And so I'd have a couple different questions maybe next time, but generally speaking, I've been happy with how things have gone and happy with the opportunity that everyone has gotten as well.
So curious, just during that phase of when you were deciding to make that big change, were you guys actively reaching out and saying, talking to different buyers and seeing who would propose something interesting for you guys, or did they come to you and say, okay, this seems pretty good at the time?
We talked to a lot. We talked to dozens of potential buyers, and so it's quite a process that doesn't get talked about too often. But we ended up hiring a banker because we felt like that was the best way to maximize the potential folks we could work with. And there were multiple paths. I mean, some were private equity companies that would take a minority investment. Other options were majority investments and then full acquisition. So there were a lot of options. Some of them were relationships that we had, but most were companies we never heard of. I mean, to be honest, we had never heard of Wes before. Some of the companies are obviously the big tech companies that you have heard of. So it was an ordeal. I certainly recommend going through a process like that, because there's just a whole world of things you're not thinking about. And so for me, those were things that were new, and we wouldn't have the resources to do it ourselves.
Makes sense. So you would suggest, if based on the situation you were at, hiring a banker obviously helped you get a good transaction on the table.
Yeah, I mean, even just from a pure negotiation perspective as well. I mean, it's a very emotional process, and it's really hard to remove yourself. It's just like buying a house, right? Like it's really hard to sell your own house, maybe because you're really emotionally tied to it, and there's a lot of things that you don't want to hear, but maybe true, or vice versa, right?
Yeah.
And so that for us it was nice that I didn't have to directly interface with the buyers. I mean, I did in a lot of ways, but not in terms of like pure negotiation, which was nice.
Makes sense. Cool. So thanks for sharing that. Kind of diving into kind of the onboarding process, which we want to talk about today. So I think from what you're understanding, there's a direct impact on user churn, which I believe you say is the number one factor of our product. If the customer onboarding experience isn't great, what are the most common areas that you see where SaaS owners could drastically improve their onboarding process, and how do we start to look at that internally to start improving it?
Yeah, and first thing I'd like to say is it's one of the things that we learned at Ambassador, and we're taking that and applying it to onboard, is that on the onboarding function of most companies tends to be both the unsung heroes of the organization, but also I think really underutilized and unfortunately neglected in a lot of cases. And companies need to be more proactive and spend more time thinking about the onboarding process internally for their own teams. But even more importantly is how does it affect the customer experience? Because the customer experience has already started, probably through the sales process. But if not, it's definitely starting as soon as they log into your app for the first time. And so that really is where you need to be proactive. And it starts with planning and having processes. And it's surprising how little process many companies have, even big companies. And so for us, thinking about, articles all over the internet that say really poor onboarding experience is one of the primary number one or number two reason for customer churn. And if you are a SaaS business relying on subscriptions, you need to keep your customers. Everything you do from a business perspective relies on customers staying with you, right? Like, because otherwise the whole dynamics of your business have to change. So I think the number one thing to think about from an onboarding perspective is build process and invest in your onboarding practices from an organizational perspective, which usually means having people that do it full time. That's the first step I think that we did when we got to about 20 people at Ambassador. We had someone who their whole job was to onboard customers, and I think that's really important.
Okay. So you mentioned there's a salesperson. It starts from sales and then all the way until activation of when they actually use your product. Who would you say is the best to own the onboarding experience process and continue to improve it? So in your case, you had one person full time. What is their role? Is that the CEO? Is that the CEO, an SDR? Is that a customer success person? Who are you looking to hire or put that onto?
Yeah. So what we did again at Ambassador was the onboarding department lived under the success team. So the success department really had two different functions. One was onboarding and one was account management. And we globally called that customer success. So I would imagine in most companies that are 10 to 50 or 100 people are going to have an onboarding department with several people. We had 4 or 5 onboarding coaches is what we called them, that exclusively just help companies get launched, right? So it was taking them from point A, which is contract signed or sign up, to point B, which is go live. And so those are the types of, that's where that, again, I feel pretty strongly that department should live in the customer success world. But ultimately the onboarding folks, they float and they work with the sales team, right? They have to understand what's coming down the pipeline. And they also work very closely with their success counterparts, the account managers, who are really interfacing with the clients on a day-to-day basis. But that typically happens after they get going, right? After they get implemented, after all the nitty-gritty details get ironed out. So that's where onboard has this really unique function of living right in the middle of two pretty material processes. They're the ones that sort of hold everything together. They're the glue.
Got it. And then when you're talking about metrics, so now looking to hire, like say, a full-time customer success to own that, or under the customer success team, you're bringing on a full-time person. How do you measure and justify the ROI on a customer success as an investment of your budget, especially where SaaS businesses models that are easy to replace? And maybe, what are some key metrics that you would look at to track and then, tie that back to ROI?
Sure. And there's a couple things to think about in terms of the value of onboarding. And I would say first is, of course, the actual lessening or mitigation of churn. So if for example, you have only one person doing onboarding and you have a cohort and you see your churn, and then you have 2 or 3 people doing onboarding and you see your churn, is there a difference, right? What is the delta? And that delta is real dollars. That's the most obvious. And remember that that churn sort of cascades infinitely, right? So for every dollar you lose, you're never getting that dollar back in the future. Whereas every dollar you keep, it keeps stacking up and growing on itself. So with subscriptions, if you can lower your churn by a 0.5 percentage point, it could be tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year for many sort of mid-sized businesses. So that's the most important metric, but there are more. So I think some other obvious ones are, many companies don't get paid until the customer launches. So time to launch is a KPI, literally is how quickly do you get paid, which is also really important from a cash flow perspective. And then alternatively, if they don't launch, maybe you don't get paid. So there is actually a very specific direct tie to revenue there. So all of those are KPIs. Days to launch is something that we thought about. So how quickly can we get customers to using the product the way it's intended to? That's really important. And then there's also the customer satisfaction. I mean, again, there's some sort of agreement in place where they're ideally going to continue working with you down the road. How do they feel about this part of your business? How do they feel about this part of your process? That should be trending up as you dedicate more people to doing it well. And so those are some of the KPIs that we would think about for sure. How many companies are also moving forward versus like stalled or something like that, very like a macro metric.
Makes sense. Would you use NPS score as well in there? Would you build that into the process?
Yeah, I mean, NPS makes sense. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be NPS, so to speak. I think some sort of customer satisfaction, whatever your baseline. I mean, again, it's more about trending up and to the right from a baseline perspective, not necessarily the type of metric. I think if it's days to launch, obviously you want it to be less days. If it's NPS, you want NPS to go up. But yeah, I think any of those work. Getting feedback is obviously very important part of the process as well.
Cool. So we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that make the choice to provide maybe a lot more customization in their onboarding experience, which is obviously less scalable, let's say, or it just takes a lot more time to onboard versus more of like a turnkey solution, because they feel that maybe they provide more value to their clients by spending more time with them. But from a business perspective, which do you believe is the right way? Should you be personalizing that onboarding experience?
Yeah, yes, you should. And here's the reason why. There are some applications that you can use that are really, really simple or really lightweight, and you can get up and running quickly, right? And that's like a more general, global, easy to onboard yourself, like maybe like Zoom, right? Like everyone can just kind of onboard themselves. But most business software tends to have a pretty complex implementation that involves multiple people doing multiple things. And in those cases, you should customize it as much as possible, right? And customization doesn't mean doing it from scratch, because that's not efficient. Customization in our world, in my opinion, is, and what we're doing in Onboard, is creating a template that can be customized for the use case quickly, right? So one of the things we're doing is creating customized checklists in a most automated way, because at Ambassador, when we did this, even though we had templates and we knew the requirements, it still took a couple hours to sort of pick and choose the things that needed to be done. And so with Onboard, that'll happen in a matter of seconds, right? Or a matter of minutes. And those are the types of savings that over the course of dozens of customers saves you days of work, right? And just makes you more efficient, allows you to do more as an onboarding coach or an implementation coach, and ultimately as to scale your team more. So I certainly think customization is important. And the balance is, how do you automate customized processes, right? And I think that's what you can use software for, to make that a lot better than doing it yourself.
And if you already have the process and maybe you have that checklist already internally, is there any tips or suggestions or any additions you'd think that people should add on that checklist to make the onboarding experience, let's say, get that wow factor for the client?
Yeah, I mean, so it comes down to a few things. One is certainly being proactive. Providing that custom experience quickly is important. something that we found is that dealing with customers through email creates a lot of challenges. If you're managing 10 or 15 customers implementation, and then someone saying, I don't get this, that's really hard to understand. What's the context for what they're asking? So, thinking about how do you contextualize questions and comments? How do you make the process smooth instead of going back and forth multiple times, right? So I think those are some of the things that we think about in terms of being more proactive and creating a better experience from the beginning. It's a little bit different for every company based on what actually needs to get done. But I think ultimately putting everything in one place and allowing them to see all the things that need to be done, all the tasks and assignments and the due dates, that allows for everyone to be on the same page, which is ultimately actually a lot harder than it seems. It's hard to do it internally, let alone between two organizations with lots of different rules and experiences and cultures. So that's something that you want to, streamline as much as possible.
Makes sense. Is there any, can you share any, let's say the top SaaS companies that you think have the best onboarding experience, say maybe the top 3 or 5 for our audience to check out and learn from, and why you like them?
Yeah. So, I certainly think Ambassador has one of the best experiences. We surveyed all of our clients, and we work with some of the biggest companies in the world. And we surveyed them and said, how does this compare to any other software that you've implemented? And we gave them a bunch of options ranging from this is the best experience we've ever had to this is the worst we've ever had. And I think it was like 95% of the time, this is one of the best or this is the best onboarding experience. And so the way that we did that was we really worked backwards and created this very personalized, obviously touch, but it was through processes and through a lot of personalization and of course, attention to detail. And that involved, we weren't using software, and that was sort of one of the big problems. We used a couple, third-party solutions, but the reason why we came up with Onboard was because we didn't feel like there was any software made for us. And so that's really the big difference is you can buy a project management software, you can buy a chat software or a messaging software, what have you, but nothing really encompasses the entire onboarding experience the way that it should be done, in our opinion. And so that's what Onboard, .io is doing. And so we're pretty pumped to do that. So it's hard for me to say any other companies, to be honest. We generally thought onboarding was pretty rough. And even for us, and I'm trying to think of like companies that we onboarded, but most of them I wouldn't recommend. We always talked about in the sales process, lots of companies ask, and they should ask the salespeople, what is an onboarding process? What does the onboarding process look like? And if the sales rep actually explain that process in like a minute or 2 minutes? And you'd be surprised by how often they just kicked it and said, oh yeah, it's like pretty easy, or it's only going to take a couple weeks, but they couldn't explain the process. I can almost guarantee you that it will take several weeks or months or months, so that's something that we found was quite apparent was we always asked that question, and it was surprising how few sales reps could answer it in a meaningful way, which usually means that they're sort of trying to, giving you the runaround a little bit, unfortunately. And so that was where we really, thought about that and, wanted to make a change.
So it does actually start from the salesperson as well, right? Because you don't want them over promising, under delivering, because that does affect everybody in the end, right? So I think you have to start from that end as well, right? So yeah.
Exactly. And it's an organizational, it's really an organizational and cultural intent, right? A principle almost, as we call it, or like a value, right? So you have to intentionally think about the end user when you're doing onboarding. And if you don't, if you just say, hey, these are the steps, and we don't care if it's an engineer or a marketer or a lawyer who are doing these, those people read things very differently and they interact with things differently. So you really have to be intentional about crafting an experience that works for the person who's intended to do it. And so for us, it was multiple people. It was marketers, but it was engineers, but it was also compliance because we were dealing with big enterprise companies. And so like the language and the context needed to be appropriate for those parties. And, I think we learned how to do that starting in the sales process and asking who else is involved. And that helped us create a better experience during the onboarding process. We knew those things. And, in many cases that helped us deliver a much better experience. But again, it was still really manual for us. And And the goal was, hey, how do we make this better? How do we, lower churn and, basically generate more revenue? So those were things that we were always thinking about.
Makes sense. So for those in our audience, if you're looking to check it out, that's getambassador.com. So check out their onboarding experience. I'm actually going to check it out myself too, see what you guys have done. For those who have customer support, I think that's what most people think about when they're onboarding, maybe some people and they have clients coming in at the beginning stages. For you, what's the difference between customer support and customer experience? And when do you need to consider having one or the other? Like, do you start off, if you're building your company, having customer success from day one, or does it start with support and then there's a certain threshold or point you want to hit and you say, okay, we need to bring on a customer success person?
Yeah. And so the way that I think about customer support is customer support, in my view, is more of like a ticketing, more rote answers, right? Like, so you're solving an important part, you're helping your customer be more successful, but mostly you're not getting too deep in the process. You're really just answering basic questions, and it's really a ticketing system, right? Where I see the difference between customer support and, what we called customer success, but really a more proactive approach, is really the difference between being, proactive instead of taking in questions when they come, right? So like a customer support, again, typically reactive. Companies are throwing questions at you, customers are throwing questions at you, and you answer them when you can, right? And you close the ticket, et cetera. But customer success is really a proactive function where you're proactively making the customer more successful. And for us, there's two parts to that. One is getting them live, right? Because they won't be successful till they use it. And then once they're using it, how do they use it better? And that for us was account management. And those are people that are proactively checking in, saying, how are things going? What can we do better? What are you getting stuck on? Or what are the, how are you thinking about things differently? Or what are your new organizational goals? So we had those two functions that sat together, that worked together underneath the, same success team, but there were two very different roles. We had the implementation folks who were helping and they were a little bit more technical. And then you have the account managers who are kind of building the relationships more, still answering questions, but not only just tickets, right? They're more consultative. They're saying, we've seen these types of strategies work across several companies, some of them like you. Maybe if you try this, and this, you'll see more success. Or maybe if you don't do this, it may be easier, save you more time, things like that. So that's really the big difference for us, is the difference between proactive and reactive, and really sort of taking the bull by the horns and creating a department where you're, helping define successful outcomes opposed to just taking in what comes at you.
And then the same thing, are you doing that from day one? Would you look to have both, or is there a certain stage where I can see it, customer success, I think probably is good to start from the beginning and have that proactive approach and built into your business from day one. But I mean, most people I think look to start with customer support, right?
Yeah, I would say like the way that we're doing things, and even so we're doing this at Onboard right now, right? So when you're 10 people, you tend to have a lot of people doing a lot of things, right? Like you're a generalist. You have to solve lots of problems in lots of departments. And so, at Onboard, it will be myself and some of the co-founders doing success support, onboarding. We'll do all those things. As you start growing, and around like 20 people is where you start specializing, in my experience. So when you get to about 20 people, you stop doing 4 things and you do one thing, try to do one thing really well. And so I think, you start off just having a generalist support person and maybe, general salespeople, and they do the demos and they do the outreach and they do, everything in between. And success, maybe they do the customer calls. They also do the tickets and everything like that. So, when you get to about 20 folks, if you're growing your business, and, maybe you have more, you have a more complicated onboarding process with like some technical implementations, and there might need to be some more complex conversations that take place. That's where you start thinking about adding, an onboarding coach specifically, or a success team, multiple people, right? So for us, at Ambassador, the average contract value was, it was 5 figures, right? The average. So it was a significant amount of money. So, we knew that in order to charge those prices, we needed to deliver a sort of a white glove experience, right? Or a concierge service, so to speak. So those are the types of things where, we charge more, but we also had to put in more people and more face time, so to speak, in front of them. So again, I think generally speaking, if you're smaller, you'll just have support at generalists. But as you get bigger or as you charge a lot more, and I think either one of those things, you'll probably bifurcate your team and have more specialists doing both of those things separately.
And just to add to that, so your ACV was a lot higher. You said, 5 figures. If it's, say, you're a $99 a month solution, and your ACV, whatever, is $1,000, $2,000. Would you still look at that? Would you still consider having that, or is it not worth it?
I think you would. I think you would still have people dedicated to onboarding. I think the question is, and this is where I think software comes into play, is can you be that much more efficient? So for us, we said, and I'm making this up, but it's not that far off, is we might say, hey, every onboarding coach needs to manage $1 million of ARR. That may still be the case with the smaller ACV. You just that may be you're managing 500 companies or 1,000 companies instead of 10 or
Makes
15.
sense.
So I think that's where you need to be more efficient. But ultimately, what I've found is you will generally be more efficient if you specialize. So at some point, as an organization, you probably want people to just do one thing and to do it really well. And so, that's the case where, again, in our experience, that's where we bought software to make people better and faster, right? So again, that's what we're helping to do at Onboard, is we're providing that software to help you manage those things faster.
Got it. And do you have a tech stack that you recommend of tools that our audience can start using to implement for improving their own customer success or onboarding experience, or maybe what you guys use at Ambassador?
Yeah. So the number one, so for onboarding specifically, the best tech stack is going to be Onboard. So definitely, if you're interested in, we're just getting launched in the next month or two. So if you're interested, certainly feel free to sign up. We're doing a beta test. We're looking for sort of a wide range of types of companies. And so if people are willing to commit to giving us good feedback and working with us directly, you'll get onboarding from the owners and founders of Onboard. So you'll get a super concierge experience at a price that won't be the price in a year from now. But generally speaking, I mean, things like Google Docs, we are big fans of Gmail. So like asynchronous communication is important. Again, I think we're going to be handling that in Onboard. We use companies like Basecamp and Monday as things, but again, I think the pain points for us was those did 70% of what we needed, but they didn't do 100%, and they weren't made for us, and they weren't native experiences. And I think those are the challenges longer term, is that you don't want things to live in another system, and the first experience that a new customer has is to go to another company's product. That's not the best experience. So with Onboard, again, we're going to make it feel like it's inside of the app that you're buying. It'll just be managed and run through Onboard, and just made it that much easier.
Nice. So everything's all in one. Did you guys have all your SOPs in Google Docs, or were they in your project management tools? How was it done previously?
It was mixed, and we also did a lot of like slide, and we had several decks, and we sent a bunch of resources. It was really lots of content and resources spread amongst several different apps, and that was part of the pain, right? For us was every coach did it a little bit differently, which worked for them, but then it was hard to see what was the most efficient way because we didn't have any visibility into what people were doing necessarily unless we asked them. And you also lose a lot of visibility. Ours was tied pretty deeply into Salesforce as well, which is great. But if many folks out there listening probably know, Salesforce is also really clunky and really not made for success coaches. And so it wasn't where they really wanted to live every day, but we sort of required them to add data in there for them. So the best way to explain it was a lot of information in a lot of places instead of it being in one place.
Cool. So you're saying our audience can expect Onboard to launch, say, in the next month or so, or do you guys have a date yet to when they can start using it?
We don't have a date yet. We're starting with a private beta. And so what that means is it'll still be closed to the public, but we will be working directly with the teams and the folks who are using Onboard to provide sort of the best experience to get them up and running quickly, but more importantly, to to help continue to build the roadmap and functionality to match the needs of our clients. So, it's a great time to get deeply connected to a product that should solve some really big problems for them. So especially companies that are really investing and thinking about onboarding, this is the one opportunity for them to really, to really get a lot of my co-founders have been consulting on this and charging, lots and lots of money, like tens of thousands a month, right, to consult. So they're getting this consulting for free, basically, and they're getting software with it. So it's a pretty good deal. We're going to be spending a lot of time with these folks to make sure that it works exactly as we expect it to.
Wow. Awesome. So guys, if you're listening, if you guys are looking to improve your customer success experience, now is the time. Getting it for almost nothing. Final question, where can our audience get in touch with you, Jeff, and learn more about what you're working on or learn more about Onboard? Sure.
Best places are Twitter. It's, at Jeff_Epstein, LinkedIn as well. Same name, Jeff Epstein, of course. Onboard is also on all the social platforms. Typically it's Onboard.io without a no period or anything. So feel free to reach out and of course you can find our website Onboard.io and message us there. Definitely, love to chat and learn about your experiences and try to, help make this a easier onboarding experience for everybody. That's really the goal for us.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Jeff. I'm glad that you were able to join us today. Very grateful for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. It was great.
All right. Take care. Thank you all for listening in to today's episode. Don't forget to join us for another episode where we interview top leaders and experts in the business and SaaS industry. If you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. That would be really, really appreciated. Otherwise, if you have any feedback, suggestions, or improvements for this podcast, please feel free to send it directly to me on our website at horizoncapital.com. Or you can just tweet me at Akil Jabbar. Thanks again and hope to see you guys on the next episode.